Bitcoin getting crushed again. It is now off 16% since hitting all-time highs earlier this month.
But the bank also pointed to tens of billions of pounds in extra savings by households who have not been able to spend, but at some point could be unleashed. Another much-needed shot in the arm.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Focus on Finance. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the topic of interest. We'll examine what it is, what its role is in the financial system today, and what Islam has to teach about interest. Joining me in the studio again this week, we have Niazi Hoolash, an accountant by profession, and Shameem Jamal Ahmed, a missionary here in Mauritius. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Earlier, we asked some members of the general public what they thought interest was and whether it was good or bad. Let's hear what they had to say.
L'intérêt, par contre, pour moi, il y a une mauvaise affaire. Pour moi, il y a une mauvaise affaire. Parce que, fait que moi, j'aime, pour religion, il ne pas permettre moi d'entendre l'intérêt, de se parler. Parce que nous, si nous faisons travail, nous ne travaillons pas aucune question avec l'intérêt.
Non, l'intérêt pour banchi du monde, enfin, moi prendre l'île au moins, moi pas vous dire banchi du monde, moi prendre l'île au moins, il y a un petit peu hard. Il y a un petit peu hard. Parfois, si vous regardez pour moi mauvais, si vous allez, ou dire comment, ou enfin. Situation parfois difficile, mais on va aller au dire où on a une facilité, on va prendre un loan 100 000 euros, puis on va rembourser, vous pouvez rembourser 150 000 d'années. Et peut-être, l'intérêt là, il est haram.
Pour moi, l'intérêt, il y a une mauvaise affaire. Parce que par exemple, quand on fait une auto, on va payer l'intérêt beaucoup. Et quand nous allons, si nous prenons l'argent en point, si nous prenons un petit loan, trois quarts, l'argent perd dans l'intérêt, et je vous dis, pas facile. Pas facile pour bâtir, pas facile pour construire à cause de l'intérêt. Moi-même, tu faisais peut-être 100 000 euros, moi, beaucoup 100 000 euros, parce que l'intérêt.
Oui, les bons affaires, parce que quand nous travaillons sur là.
Oh, l'intérêt dépend qui système on peut servir. Il y a plusieurs façons, il y a sur bon côté, il y a sur mauvais côté. En termes islamiques, il y a sur bon, sur pas bon. Mais en termes généralistes, l'intérêt, c'est du monde qui veut faire profit. Il dépend, c'est qui moyen aussi, il y a pour faire un profit avec la banque sur l'intérêt. Il n'est pas obligatoire l'intérêt, la banque, mais il y a plusieurs aspects qui viennent l'intérêt. Pour moi, vous avez mon intérêt avec l'intérêt. On préfère vivre la simplicité.
C'est le moyen.
C'est le moyen, parce qu'il ne faut pas concentrer avec 2%, 3%, qui ça vous représente.
Vous pensez l'intérêt, c'est donnant. Si vous gagnez, allons dire, par exemple, un loan, vous voyez ça là, l'intérêt. On prend un loan, si la banque ou de nous, un emprunt, pas pour nous. Si c'est, dans nous, un service, mais en contrepartie, il vous prend, il vous charge, voilà. Parce que quand vous calculez, que vous pouvez rembourser, parfois vous rembourser des fois plus.
Différent l'économie, dans différents types de mouvances dans l'intérêt. Je pense que ça dépend de l'économiste qui PG nous finance, vous dire nous qui taux d'intérêt qui est meilleur pour nous, mais définitivement pour le petit peuple, un taux d'intérêt bien plus faible et bien plus intéressant. Idéal.
L'intérêt c'est quoi? L'intérêt c'est un paiement qu'il vous recevoir par rapport à immobilisation ou ressources. Moi, j'ai 1000 roupies là dans mon poste. Puis pour rester dans mon poste jusqu'à demain, ou dire moi, laisse, on prend 100 000 roupies là, ou demain, on rend moi 1010 roupies. Ça veut dire qu'on rend moi 1% l'intérêt là. Mais il donne l'intérêt de nous 100 000 roupies là, parce qu'on va faire non, il y aura moi.
So some interesting views there. Some people saying interest is good, some saying interest is bad. But let's start with some definitions. Niazi side, what is interest?
In simple terms, interest can be considered as the price of money. Let's take, for example, someone or a bank has $100,000 that it doesn't need immediately for its own needs. It might decide to lend this money to someone who needs it. Now, when you're lending money to some other person, and when that person is refunding, we know as a matter of fact, they will not necessarily be refunding $100,000, maybe $110,000. If there is an obligation, no matter what the circumstances are, for the borrower to return the $110,000, then the $10,000 is considered as interest, an interest cost for the borrower and an interest income for the lender. So in essence, in that way, interest can be considered as the price of money, where there's an obligation to return the money.
So that's in the current capitalist system.
Correct.
It's the price of money. What role does interest play in this current system?
Well, I think in the current economic systems today, in the financial systems, interest is everywhere. Mm-hmm. If we just look at our lives, for instance, if you're putting your money in a bank, you'll be hard-pressed not to earn interest on it even if you wanted to. If you're borrowing money, you'll be paying interest back. If you're using your credit card and you delay by a day or two over the deadline to replenish your card, you'll be paying interest. If you want an overdraft facility, temporary, you'll be paying interest. If you want to, there's consumer credit. If you're buying on hire purchase a set of furniture from a shop, there'll be interest on it. You buy a car, it's very commonplace today to buy a car using some leasing facilities. There is interest. Even on services so essential, like building of large infrastructural projects, or even buying planes, for instance. Nobody buys a plane today from the money that they've earned. Maybe some very oil-rich countries or oil-rich magnates can do that. But in essence, most of the airlines buy their aircraft on leasing. So interest really is at the center of the financial system today.
So interest is at the center of this financial system that we have today. Islam speaks about interest and gives clear directions. What are they?
Well, Shafique said, I think we are all aware that, first of all, Islam prohibits interest. When we talk about money, the Islamic principle concerning the usage of money, apart from bribery, corruption, deceit, which are already condemned to some extent today in today's society, Islam categorically prohibits Muslims to get involved in two things. One, riba, and second, maisir. Riba is broadly translated as interest, and maisir as gambling. So maisir is basically any situation, any transaction, any investment whereby you have no control whatsoever on the outcome. One, and secondly, the profit, if ever there is some kind of profit, is not proportional to the investment in no way. So this is what is the definition of gambling in Islamic terms. When we come to riba, it's very interesting to note that the word used in the Holy Quran is riba, interest, is derived from rabawa in Arabic, raba, which basically means something that multiplies by itself, something that keeps on increasing in excess. So in its very, etymology, it gives you the meaning of what interest is all about. And in Islam, any transaction whereby a profit is guaranteed with no element of risk whatsoever falls under riba. So it has a broader connotation than what is commonly seen today. So apart from the common meaning of interest, as explained by Niazi Saheb, all monopolistic arrangements in the society where cartels that are made in view to control the market, to kill the competition, is forbidden in Islam. Because they are arrangements that are made whereby the element of risk is almost zero, almost zero. So they also fall under this broad definition of riba. So this as well is prohibited.
So clearly, I think we all know interest is forbidden. We have a definition in the financial system, which is about money. We have a wider definition in Islam. But let's go into some details. Why is it that, what reasons has Allah given for forbidding interest?
First of all, the prohibition of interest in the Holy Quran is a divine commandment. So for believers, there need not be any justification. This is the first thing we have to mention, that the Holy Quran very clearly says in chapter 3 that, O ye who believe, devour not interest. So it's a clear-cut instruction that we should not take interest as a first thing. And we can find several hadith sayings of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he has, in very harsh terms, sometimes even cursed those who, are involved in transactions that have elements of interest in them. And Shafique said, we were talking about interest while going through the sayings of the Holy. There are various sayings, not one. Even in the Holy Quran, at various places, Allah has mentioned interest and has prohibited interest. And in several sayings, ahadith, the Holy Prophet ﷺ also prohibited interest. While going through those ahadith, I came across one which is quite telling, actually, quite, we can say, prophetic saying, where the Prophet ﷺ said, and most certainly he is referring to today, that he said that there will certainly come a time for mankind when everyone will take riba, interest. And if he does not do so, its dust will reach him. Even if a Muslim out of faith wants to keep away from interest, in some way he will feel the dust of it. And maybe it is something that maybe Niazi Sahib can explain further, how even if we want to avoid it, and we are bound to have some kind of,
Yeah, I'd like you, with the permission, to react to that. It is so befitting what Murabbi Sahib is saying, because just think of it. Let us say you're an employee at a bank, and your role is you're a security guard at the bank. Mm-hmm. So you're not involved in the money cycle. But however, since the bank is earning most of its income out of interest, then in a certain indirect way, your income is coming from interest. Mm-hmm. And on the paying side as well, it's the same. Okay, I would certainly agree. It will be hard pressed to find a situation today where we are not at least in some form of contact with interest.
So I agree. I think you can't get away from interest. Even in the Jamaat Ahmadiyya system, there is a recognition that interest will be earned by Ahmadis. And what is the teaching about in those circumstances where Ahmadis have earned interest through no deliberate action, but have earned the interest? Are they allowed to use it, or what is the Jamaat's teaching on this?
Well, that question was asked to the founder of the community, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, the promised Messiah. And he clearly said that, no, we cannot use interest for our personal needs. Yes, there's one avenue for us to use interest. If we want to, it is to contribute towards the propagation of faith, of Islam. So this is the current practice in the Jamaat, where wherever Ahmadis earn something out of interest, most of them, they give that back to the community only for the purpose of propagating of religion and not any other thing.
Yeah. So Islam is very categoric. We cannot take, nor can we charge interest, and nor can we use the interest should we do it. And we should even avoid paying interest. Now, a common reaction when this is brought up amongst non-Muslims, and maybe amongst some Muslims, is it is everywhere. If today somebody needs to buy a car, a telephone, some furniture, it's almost invariably the temptation is to buy it on credit. They can get it today, even if they don't have the money. Is there anything good, therefore, in consumer credit? Niazi.
Well, as in many things, there's the good and the bad. I won't say there's nothing good about it. There is a good in the sense that at the moment, if at that moment the person needs to have a TV, there's an and they don't have the money, a nice TV, so they might have the ephemeral pleasure of having that nice TV in their home. So that's the good side to it. But the problem is, if they've bought it on credit, they have actually not borrowed from the bank to do it. They've borrowed from the future earnings. The first thing. The second thing, okay, if the TV is costing $1,000, they're probably refunding $1,500 over the next 2 or 3 years.
But they are borrowing from the bank. In what way are they borrowing from future earnings?
No, they're not borrowing from the bank, because at the end of the day, if you borrow from the bank and you're refunding, but today, okay, when they are borrowing, first of all, it's not from the bank, okay, when we're talking consumer credit, it's often those shops which are giving them, and they are refunding from their future earnings, from the money they don't have. Today they can buy one product, tomorrow another product, and before they know it, if their circumstances change in the future, and we've just been through such a period with COVID, many people across the world have lost their jobs or have found their salaries significantly reduced, and this has created a crisis to such an extent that suicide rates have gone up. Stress and depression is very common, and a lot of the stress comes from financial stress, people not being able to repay. And if they had deferred their expense on an item which is not of necessity, and most of those items bought on consumer credits, we could consider luxury items. Because let's face it, if you want to buy a simple phone, you might not need to hire consumer credit. But if you want that latest smartphone which does so many things, then it's quite expensive. And this is where I see a lot of youngsters, who buy phones, which is probably higher than their salary in a month, and they will going to repay it over the next 2 or 3 years. That is the reality. So it is creating a society where instant gratification is encouraged, and if you put all that with advertising, those reality shows, those influencers who project an image of what success looks like, and the people who are looking at it generally, they won't necessarily see the effort which has been put behind it. They see the tip of the iceberg. Oh, that's a nice lifestyle, so let me buy that latest car or that latest phone, because that is how I would emulate being successful. But it is an emulation. It's not reality, and that creates a lot of problems.
So I think, in a way, interest is empowering consumerism, materialism, and that is leading to many cases to personal misery.
Inflation as well.
Inflation, this is another aspect. Is this one of the reasons Islam forbids interest?
Certainly, when I'm hearing, this is where actually Islam comes in. Islam, yes, we have basic needs. We're talking about credits. Yes, let's face it, there are maybe some people who are in some situation where they need something which is very basic. We're talking about a roof, food, basic items, which Islam says that should be given by the state, first of all, in a proper Islamic state. So, but just as Niazi said, most of those items are not basic items, basic needs. They are luxury items. And this is where Islam, very categorically, in many places of the Holy Quran, teaches Muslims to develop what is described as qanaat, to be contented with what you have. This, is a golden principle, especially today. That this is how much I earn, and this is the lifestyle that I can afford, and this is what I should do. Basically, today we have a society who is living well beyond their, standard of living that they can afford. So this is where Islam says that no, don't be deceived by all, those reality shows and stars and stuff. No. Holy Quran says, see what you are sending for tomorrow. وَلْتَنْظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدٍ. And this is basically, Niazi just said that you are borrowing from yourself in the future. Islam just wants us that, no, see what you are sending ahead. So Islam's, first of all, teaches us that, this material world is not the objective of life. There's so much beyond that, and teaches us, the Holy Prophet ﷺ also spoke extensively about it, to be contented. So if really a believer, a Muslim, understand those golden principles of the Holy Quran and of the hadiths of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he will not, fall easily in those, let's say, traps of the, capitalist society today. Yeah.
So at a consumer level, interest is bad. It leads to misery, and it makes people poorer. I think this is a concept. It's worth repeating. When you're borrowing, you're actually depriving yourself of buying things in the future with your own money. You're making your future self poorer for borrowing and getting something now that you could have waited for. And this is especially sad for consumer items, electronics especially. The people who are buying irons and telephones and even televisions, many a time they are paying it over 3 or 4 years, and after just 1 or 2 years, that item has lost its value, stopped working, but the debt remains, and you're still paying for something you're no longer enjoying. Had you saved your money, you could have got a better one, or you would have got it without any interest. Shameem Sahib, I think we've heard written in by some books and speeches by the Khulafa about how interest leads to physical warfare.
Well, not only by the Khulafa, Shafique said, by God himself. The word war has been associated with interest. In the Holy Quran, Allah says in the Holy Quran, O ye who believe, fear Allah and relinquish what remains of interest, if you are believers. But if you do it not, then beware of war from Allah and His Messenger. So this, this turmoil and growing frustration, and sometimes that ultimately leads to war, has been mentioned in the Holy Quran, and we have been warned that an economic system that revolves around interest will cause growing frustration in the society, and it will result in social unrest and war.
Yes. So interest rates can lead to war. I think that's an appropriate place to finish our panel discussion. But let's leave the final word to Daniel Arif Sahib, who we spoke to earlier, and we asked him to give us his definition of interest and what Islam teaches us about interest. And that will sum up a little bit of what we've been discussing earlier. So let's hear what he had to say.
So you see, in the capitalist world, money is treated as a commodity besides being a medium of exchange. So like other commodities, it has a price. One has to pay its price if one wants to borrow it. But Islam doesn't believe in the principle of money reproducing by itself. The word used in connection with interest in the Holy Quran is riba, but its connotation is not identical with that of the word interest as commonly understood. The concept of riba covers so many things in reality, but the teaching of the Holy Quran on the subject is very clear. Interest is forbidden in all its forms. And in this day and age, whenever a bank makes a loan, it simultaneously creates what we call a matching deposit in the borrower's bank account. When a bank is extending a credit, a mortgage, the bank is actually creating new money. So, in other words, there is no such thing as loss for a bank, because the money lent when a mortgage is extended is created out of nothing. It's guaranteed profit. It's actually very relevant that Hazrat Muslim Maud, Hazrat Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmed, the second worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, says in his lecture, The Economic System of Islam, that Islam adopts a broader definition of interest. Islam defines interest, and I quote, Islam defines interest as any transaction where the profit is guaranteed. So the key element here is risk. Islam has prohibited interest on capital because it has foreclosed the door of accumulating wealth without work or without assuming a risk. So when you have the ability to print money almost as you please, as it is the case today for commercial banks, Hazrat Muslim Maud, the second worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, says in his lecture, The Economic System of Islam, that Islam adopts a broader definition of interest, and that Islam defines interest as any transaction where the profit is guaranteed. So the key element here is risk. Islam has prohibited interest because it has foreclosed the door of accumulating wealth without work or without assuming a risk. So the general rule in Islam is that whoever wants to earn a profit must assume a risk as well. When you have the ability to print money almost as you please, as it is the case today for commercial banks, you are not taking the slightest of the risk. So Islam says that money in itself is sterile. It cannot reproduce. If you put 2 gold coins in a drawer and come back in a month, you'll find nothing more than 2 gold coins. So to sum up, labor or risk is the only way to turn money into wealth in Islam. The motive force Islam presents in place of interest to move the economic wheel is zakat, which is the second characteristic of the Islamic economic system. So zakat is generally defined as a tax levied from the well-to-do and given to the poorly off. So this teaches us sympathy of the highest order, but it's not just a mere act of giving charity. It's much more profound. It's a pillar of Islam, and it's a tax on idle wealth, so that wealth keeps circulating. So when you study zakat in more details, it's actually fascinating because it is presented in some verses of the Quran as the exact opposite of interest. For example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in verse 277, Allah says that Allah will blot out interest and will cause charity to increase. So the notions of interest and zakat are opposites, but they are intimately linked. I'm always saying that interest is a zakat, but paid to the rich. Instead, true zakat opposes current banking interests. In Islam, interest is abolished and is replaced with another mechanism, zakat, to keep money in circulation again. So to boost the economy and stimulate what we call the velocity of circulation of money, which is how fast money passes from one holder to the next. Hoarding an excessive amount of money without investing or spending it is penalized by zakat. So it is, in a way, this is in fact a similar principle to the operation of interest, but only acting in reverse. It is, in a way, it is a negative interest rate. If you hoard and don't invest back into society, you get charged.
So I think that nicely summarized the issues around interest and is in line with what we were discussing, what's bad about interest and why Islam bans it. So it remains for me to say a great thank you, Jazakumullah, to Niazi Hoolash, Shameem Jamal Ahmed, and Daniel Arif Sahib for this program. We hope you enjoyed it as well, and we hope to see you in the next program of Focus on Finance. Assalamu alaikum.